Hi there, I'm Coach Sage Kennedy of SageRunning.com.
And I'm Coach Sandy Nightpaper of Running Wild.
And today we're going to talk about some running form basics that you could use to improve your efficiency as a runner and also increase your speed and reduce the risk of injury.
So some people believe that running form comes naturally, but we haven't found this to be the case. Especially like if you start later in life or you already have other bad habits like sitting for 8 hours at a time, like that could affect how well your running form is. And even if you run on natural surfaces like concrete is very unnatural, and so you have to make sure you're running the best form possible on surfaces like that.
Alright, so here we go. We're going to cover some basics.
First thing we want to talk about is cadence, and cadence is how many steps you take per minute. Now for shorter distances like a sprint or something under 5K, you might be taking close to 190 plus steps per minute. But in distances like 5K to marathon to over, it's probably most efficient if you're taking around 180 steps per minute, give or take a little bit either way. But one thing to keep in mind with that, if you're doing trail running, that's not always the case with 180. Like obviously if you're running up rocks, your cadence would be a little bit slower, but otherwise on a lot of flatter, smoother surfaces, you want 180 steps per minute.
And that's really going to reduce the impact force, and we're going to segue into our next point, which is braking. But with that 180 step stride rate, it means you're coming down with less impact force per stride, which is really going to save your legs in terms of efficiency, but also reduce the risk of injury.
And one thing you want to remember is that when you're running faster, you're going to stay at 180 steps per minute by increasing your stride length. But when you run easier, sometimes people have a harder time getting to 180. But in that case, you actually want to shorten your stride a little bit, so that way it's easier to maintain the 180 and keep that impact force down.
So the next major point after cadence is braking force. And braking force, imagine if you're trying to ride a bike with your handlebar brakes on, or you're trying to drive your car with the emergency brake on. It's a lot of resistance. It's kind of pulling you back. And so when you're actually running, if your stride is landing in front of your body too much and you're coming down at an angle in front of your center of mass, that's going to cause reactionary forces pushing you backwards. It's like a drag force, and it's also going to send jarring reactionary forces from the ground up through your shin, causing shin splints or stress fractures in your shin, jarring your knee joint, which could cause knee pain, and jamming up into your hip. And so this kind of goes along with cadence. Where your foot lands, you want it to be under your body and moving backwards already to propel you forward, not landing out in front with this juicy heel strike that's going to be adding a huge braking force and pushing you backwards with each stride. So it's really about minimizing that ground contact time and making sure that you're landing under your center of mass and propelling yourself forward most efficiently. The next major point we're going to talk about is drop, in terms of pelvic drop. So it's looking at your pelvis, most specifically looking at your hips and how much each hip drops from side to side, or if you're swaying back and forth in this sort of plane with each step. And you don't want too much side to side motion, and you don't want your hips to actually lower down with each stride. You see people going like this. Sorry, babe. And it's really inefficient, and it's really something that's gonna maybe cause issues and injuries with your lower back. And it's something that we think is really important for efficient running form, is minimizing that hip drop, making sure your hips are stable and you're keeping your body upright and not sagging from side to side and seeing that hip drop with each step.
So going back to stride rate, having a quick stride rate can help decrease that, because when your hips are going from side to side, it probably means you're spending too long on the ground, but also it could mean that your hips or glutes or something are too weak for running. And I actually just did a video on this along with Sage. So if you kind of like watch a video on yourself running, this is a good time to have somebody film you on a treadmill. If you notice yourself doing this, make sure you're doing the glute, hamstring, and hip core exercises so your body doesn't do this.
It's all about having a strong core, strong stomach muscles, strong lower back, and proper hip mobility basically, and a lot of people get issues with this. So you know, if you think of a spaghetti noodle, you don't want the noodle overcooked and all soggy and soft, but you also don't want a noodle that's super rigid that would just break and snap in half. You want your body to be kind of al dente, kind of a firm, to be able to apply that force. It's a lot like in other sports, whether you're hitting a tennis ball or you're playing golf or you're throwing a baseball, you need to have a rigid foundation that engages your whole core and that stabilizes your hips and your shoulders all the way down to your heels. So check out Sandy's video on core strength. We're going to have a core strength video. I'll link to it in the description below, as well as at the end of this video, Sandy's core routine. That's all about core stability.
And you may also want to watch a video of like an elite runner during a race or something. Like I know like Shalane Flanagan, if you watch her, it's beautiful. Like she doesn't have that hip drop at all. So if you needed a good example to look at, go ahead and watch an elite runner, even like Sage, run in one of his videos, just so you get an idea of what it looks like.
Next point is rotation, and this goes along with what we just talked about the hip drop. That's kind of going from side to side, but this is talking about the rotation, mainly looking in the arms. You know, people have wingy elbows. You don't want your arms crossing the center of your body like this. You want more straight forward and backward types of motion. And the same thing with your hips. You don't want to be twisting like you're doing the twist. You want to be keeping nice and upright and straight with your knee lifting straight forward, because it's all about forward motion, forward momentum in this plane, forward and aft, rather than side to side. Side to side is going to be too much wasted twisting motion that's not going to be efficient and could cause all sorts of injuries.
Yeah, so it's a good reminder just to run tall and run with your shoulders back instead of like hunching forward. If you hunch forward, you're more likely to swing your arms. And a good thing to remember is that your feet are going to go where your arms go. So it's a good time to pay attention to your arm swing and just making sure they're going front and back and they're not going too far in front of you as well.
Yeah, and it's always about counteracting the shoulder motion with your hips and what your feet are doing, like Sandy said. So the feet follow the arms, vice versa. Same thing with stride rate. How fast you move your arms, your feet are going to go in line with that as well. The last thing we're going to talk about is bounce, or some people would say vertical oscillation. How much, if you look at your head, how much it's bobbing up and down, or your whole body lifting up and down with each stride. A lot of people think with running, you know, you need to be able to spring up in the air as you go forward, but you really want to minimize that vertical oscillation or bounce. You really want to just be focused on forward motion, and it's going to require you to lift your whole body weight up, but it's a lot of work if you're springing along like a rabbit or a gazelle or something. Over a long distance race, you're not going to be able to sustain that very well because it's too much up and down movement. You need to focus on trying to drive yourself forward.
Yeah, so again, going back to stride rate, having quick stride rate, if you spend less time on the ground, you're more likely to not have that vertical oscillation, or at least not to the point where it's too much.
Yeah, it's all about efficiency in the long run and trying to stay healthy and consistent. So those are our key points on running form. It's something you could be conscious of. You could work on one element on different days. You know, one day maybe just focus on stride rate, other days focus on not having too much rotation, and to just, you know, get out there, run light, run tall, and stay upright and hopefully enjoy the sport more.
Yeah, Sage brought up a good point, just focus on one thing at a time. If you go out there once and try to focus on all those things we talked about, you probably have a tendency to get really tense and over focus, and instead of just running kind of coming like more loose and natural, you're probably going to focus too much on one thing and it's not going to be fun and your body's going to tense up, and that's not good either. So take what we say seriously, but when you put it into practice, have fun with it so your body doesn't tense up.
Yeah, and thanks so much for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Be sure to check out Sandy's core routine video. We'll link to it in the description below, as well as up here. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And thank you so much. Hope your training's going well. And stay tuned for more via 2Max Productions.